As someone who has worked in software for years and has been working from home for months now, I'm almost always wearing a t-shirt, so wearing a buttoned up shirt today feels very fancy, just for you all, bringing our A game. And we'll be sending a recording of the webinar out in a follow-up email as well. If you're having any trouble with audio, feel free to reference this information. And if you're still having trouble, you can chat in, and we have a few people available to help troubleshoot any audio issues. Now, for quick context on how this webinar came together, there are a few kind of relationships or acquaintances between Fjorge and Tarmac. And over the years, Anthony, or specifically myself and Anthony from Tarmac, have been talking about this project versus product idea. And since Tarmac and Fjorge both have presence in Minneapolis, as well as offices elsewhere, but we overlap in Minneapolis, and we have an increasing involvement in the DevOps community, we saw it as a good opportunity to come together, work on this webinar, and increase the conversation with you all. So we look forward to sharing what we see, what we're working on related to DevOps, and hearing your input and feedback as well. So with that housekeeping out of the way, I will introduce our panelists and we will get underway. In the far corner of the ring, we have Brent Kastner, who is the Chief Technology Officer at Tarmac. And Tarmac is a global team distributed among 5 countries: US, Uruguay, Argentina, the UK, and Macedonia. And Brent, as we get going, feel free to correct me if that number's out of date, but last I checked, I believe that's the status. And Tarmac designs, builds, scales, and supports exceptional software. As Brent and I were preparing, I liked that he described himself as a huge nerd. I think there's of the best type of the people that we meet in software, generally describe themselves that way. And he's been in software more than 20 years, working on DevOps for a long time. So he brings a good breadth and depth of perspective to this conversation. Keely Caverno is our Director of Managed Services at Fjorge. And Fjorge is a full-service custom software development firm with end-to-end solutions. We work from solutions architecture to UX design to development, all the way through to managed services. So that end-to-end cycle. And Keely joined the Fjorge team as a project manager, and that has been her background, project managing across lots of different industries. So bringing that perspective, Keely does a great job with our team, translating between what the developers understand and what they're saying, and what the business folks understand and what they're saying. Keely has moved over to the managed services team in the last 2 years, I believe. And last year, thank you, Keely. And I work closely with Keely, so I can say that she, if I'm allowed to swear on webinars, kicks ass, and has been doing a great job refining the department. And then just to confirm, our fulfillment team is based in Minnesota, and Tarmac's teams, like I mentioned, are based in those 5 countries. So with that as our introduction, housekeeping, and brief welcome to the panelists, we'll transition to our first topic. What is DevOps and why is it important? I'll pass it over to Brent and let you kick it off.
Oh, sounds good. Thank you for that. Glad to be here, and I see that there are a number of people attending today, so thank you for your time. We certainly appreciate it. I think this is a great place to start because, fundamentally definitions are important. It gets everybody on the same page. The interesting thing with DevOps, though, is that if you're to go to talk to 10 different companies in Minneapolis about what DevOps is, you're very likely to get 10 pretty different answers back. And that has a lot to do with the fact that not everybody knows what the crystal clear definition is, and that's because there really isn't one. I'm going to share a little bit about my personal definition and what we've done at Tarmac to help our clients kind of realize what DevOps can mean for their business, because ultimately this move from sort of siloed development and operations culture to one contiguous DevOps culture is designed to support the business. So I want to spend a little time talking about that. I can also tell you pretty much right off the bat what DevOps is not. For example, DevOps is not Kubernetes. If you are running Kubernetes, you are not necessarily doing DevOps. It could be a part of your strategy for moving your business and shifting in that direction, but Kubernetes is a tool. DevOps is more of a culture and a process. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I think to get to that, though, we need to talk a little bit about the history of business and technology culture. I was lucky enough to start up in the 90s. I know I'm dating myself a little bit, but back in those days when I was just a young engineer entering the workforce and getting my feet wet with various businesses around Minneapolis, there was sort of this tribal knowledge amongst the wise technology elders that mentored me and others that, you know, if you are talking about technology, there are three things to consider: speed, quality, and cost. And these kind of technological elders used to say, you get to pick two, sort of meaning that, like, you know, if you want high quality work and you want it to be cheap, then it's going to take forever to do, right? Or if you want to go fast and keep it cheap, then quality is going to suffer. And man, at the time, that sounded like real wisdom, right? There were whole businesses that were sort of designed to function in that way. And I can recall business leaders in the companies that I worked for sort of playing around with that formula, trying to get it right for the balance, or the right balance for their business. The more I progressed in my career and became confident in both technology and on the business side of the house, the more I began to search for reasons to reject that notion. And in fact, in my opinion, there exists a different relationship between those two things. We experience this every single day. If you have quality in your software, you will go fast. If you have quality in your software, it will cost less in the long run. We're not going to compare unit costs because sometimes quality things cost more to get into, but you all know that if you buy a quality piece of furniture, it's heirloom. It could last, you know, 1 or 2 lifetimes, right? So that's really kind of the fundamental background to this. And DevOps is sort of the latest iteration of technologists who are trying to keep up with their businesses, to support them, to go as fast as possible, but also to live sane lives, and to, you know, to do things in a quality fashion. So that's the way that we think about it at Tarmac. Now, flowing from that are all kinds of technological considerations. For example, if my business is massive in scale, you know, billions of transactions per day, I can't replicate that perfectly in a testing environment. I need to be able to react to what the real world is telling me, which means often in a technical scenario, I need to be able to deploy whenever I want to deploy. Well, that forces the DevOps culture to say, like, okay, what techniques and tools do I need to bring to the table to be able to accomplish that in a sane way? Well, it speaks to some automation. It speaks to being able to deploy multiple times. Back in the old days, in the 90s, we used to do these things called deployment nights. They would start around midnight, sometimes go to 5 a.m. And the whole team would get together and we'd be moving code around. And at the end of it, hopefully everything was working. Obviously, if you try to do that at scale, that's not going to work. So it speaks to kind of a different mindset. The other piece that it speaks to, I think, is around quality. If you need to deploy, and we have clients that do this, to production, say 20, 30, 40 times a day, you can't think in the traditional way about how to do testing in QA. Once again, it sort of forces you into automation because the computer doesn't care if it runs the suite of automation tests 100 times a day. But I can tell you that your manual QA people will definitely care if you try to push 100 change through them in a particular day. So that's the shift in my mind. Once again, it's designed to support business and business agility. And that is done by breaking down silos in what has historically been siloed environments in tech. Now, the younger folks on the call are the folks that are newer in their career, thankfully, probably haven't had to deal with that, but that is the reality, and that's where it comes from. I personally really enjoy the change that it affects on organizations because you get people from different perspectives seeing things the same way. You get technologists that don't think like techies, they think like business people. And at the end of the day, that's what you want. You want technologists who think like business people because they are going to push your mission further and faster than a business person telling a technologist what to do. So Forgive me if I get carried away. I feel like some days I get paid by the word, so feel free to rein me in if this is if this is too much. But let's call that our functional definition, if that helps.
Thank you. Yeah, no, Brent, appreciate the intro, and well, Keely's got some dogs that'll be joining the webinar as well there. On that theme, Brent, of many different definitions of DevOps, you ask 10 people, 10 companies, you're going to get 10 different answers. Keely, I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you see DevOps different in a website development environment or a web dev team, as opposed to maybe a SaaS or more kind of product software team.
Yeah, so my experience with DevOps is much more limited. I'm very new to the world of DevOps, and it's become my latest obsession. That's how I'd rather read DevOps books than watch TV. So I'm learning as I'm going, but one of the biggest insights that I've gleaned from all these books and webinars is that DevOps is really centered around software development, right? Where you've got like large numbers of developers working in large companies where internal stakeholders are really who they're communicating with on a product. And what Fjorge does is we build websites and applications like mobile applications and web applications. So we're dealing with a lot of smaller projects, smaller teams, shorter timelines, which means tighter feedback loops. And if you don't get that feedback going, you miss those opportunities to improve within the existing project. That doesn't mean you can't still get that feedback for the next project, but if the goal is to really improve the existing project that you're working on, you have to move quickly and you have to collaborate a lot between the teams. And so we've got the project teams and we've got the managed services teams, which is essentially the systems administration and the support teams working together. Fjorge also does not work with internal clients like with software. So we're working with marketing agencies or like the marketing director of a direct client who are then working with an end client, like they've got their own stakeholders. So our process is really heavily influenced by the deliverables that are given to us, which makes the whole just-in-time or lean approaches that are really fundamental to DevOps tricky for us. So we have to find a way to kind of be waterfall, but also agile with a DevOps mindset. The next thing is automations. They're limited to the things that are repeatable across projects because the projects are shorter in length. The time that goes into creating the automations, automated testing, that sort of stuff for a single project doesn't really see that value unless you can repeat that automation across other projects, or if those automations and testing can be, sorry about my dog, can be brought over to the managed services team where we've got that ongoing relationship and we are testing on a routine basis to make sure that the code is still working properly. And then I think the last big thing is our clients really need a big bang deployment, right? Like they're marketing agencies and they want to deploy, a brand new site with this big marketing campaign. So how do we fit in continuous delivery and that mindset into a field where we need to do, where we need to do big bang? And so like, how do we start to see the staging site as our portal for delivery to our clients and then still be able to do that big bang? So those are some of the differences that I have started to notice.
Yeah, those are some really good points. Do you mind if I sort of dovetail on some of the things that I heard there? So a couple of things, like definitionally, once again, back to that. One of the things that we find in a lot of organizations, whether you're working with a product or a website or whatever the technical property may be, we've actually bifurcated the definition between a deployment and a release. And I think the distinction is really important, right? The definition in my mind of a deployment is the technical action of moving the code from point A to point B. Now it's available or whatnot. And the release is sort of, think of it as like the unveiling to your customer, right? There's a concept that overrides this, and I think the same is true of your business too, that we call product management. And that is like a whole separate set of disciplines and processes that a lot of organizations run. But the key is, and I think this can be done in managed services as well as, with product, is you want to keep that technical train rolling. So the deployments are always happening, but that doesn't mean that you give up the big unveiling or the big release. lot of our customers use things like feature flags, or Keely, you talked about having a lesser environment like staging. But the key is the first time everyone is looking at that is not the first time everyone's looked at it. Do you know what I mean? Like the software's been deployed, you can verify that it works and all that. And now all we're doing is adding users to it, is kind of the distinction. So I'll shut up now.
That was great. No, I appreciate the back and forth as you both kind of clarify your perspectives and compare and contrast a bit DevOps and managed services. One helpful theme there as well is showing, and you've alluded to this a bit, where where DevOps has come from, that it didn't just emerge, in a vacuum. It didn't emerge fully formed, especially because people define it in so many different ways. So we'll start with Brent again, talking about some of the origins of DevOps.
Yeah. So there are a lot of folks that claim origin here, but the first one that you can definitively point to in my mind is Flickr. So folks may remember this old site for sharing photos back in the day. Flickr was, an internet success. And truly, I think one of the first places that, my parents actually put photos. So it was like that widely adopted. They faced some of the same problems that I was talking about in my intro. They were growing at a pace that you simply could not simulate in any lesser environment. The internet was putting so much pressure on their processes and procedures that they had to normalize this ability to be able to release software, whether it's a feature, whether it's a bug fix, could be many of those different things, whenever they wanted to. And in fact, I'm sure if you do a little creative Googling on or searching on YouTube, you'll probably find some of the early videos of their engineering team talking about this mindset, which was basically, they had an ops team, they had a dev team. The two barely communicated with one another. When things would go down in the middle of the night, it was a scramble to try to figure out who could fix it. And they just took those teams and smacked them together and said, hey, you're one team now. You figure this out. And all kinds of goodness comes out of that. There are a lot of folks, like myself included, with a early stage startup here in Minneapolis. We were under similar pressures, although not at the scale that Flickr was, but reasonable. 3 billion transactions a month kind of pressure. We had the exact same issues, and we had the exact same structure: separate dev team, separate ops team, and things got way better the moment those two came together. There's a term that you'll hear in the industry now, because I think it describes really succinctly what this looks like. You're shifting those responsibilities left. In effect, more people are becoming developers. And that's true in our organization too. We have developers that started as developers and now are learning infrastructure. And we have infrastructure people who are now becoming developers. And the reality is, in this day and age, those things are blending. It won't be too many years forward when, if you're a pure play developer, you're going to be expected to know how to deal with Amazon, how to deploy, how to scale, how to do all of those things. It's just part of the job. So in effect, it's shifted left.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. And Keely, the angle here that I'd be curious to hear from you on is, we've talked a bit about DevOps origin, and I know that you and I sometimes will geek out about particularly a book that you're reading, which I appreciate. So can you speak a bit to DevOps and managed services origin, and how you've seen those intersect, or even more recently, kind of how you're seeing managed services cross into DevOps?
Yeah, really what I can speak more to is, like, what do we mean by managed services? So at Fjorge, what we mean by managed services is the infrastructure, so the systems administration, setting up the server, security, monitoring, that sort of stuff, and the support, the ongoing support. So, traditionally maintenance, but our managed services teams are doing so much more than just maintaining the site. We're enhancing the sites. We're doing QA. We're providing, ideas to the clients on how they can continue to enhance and make their sites more secure, perform better, all that sort of stuff. And so the way that I see it really is DevOps is, as Brent mentioned, development and operations. And so with that equation, managed services at Fjorge is the ops side of the DevOps. And a little bit more about my own background is that I've been at Fjorge for 2 years, but I spent 1 year as a project PM on the project side, so the dev side. And then I've spent 1 year on the managed services side, so the ops side. And I've actually had, some of the project team developers come over to the managed services side with me. And so there's this realization of, oh, that's what happens after this project goes to the other side. And, oh, that's how, like, if we had only done this differently, we would not be, encountering this issue on this site that we literally are the ones that built last year. So at Fjorge, the DevOps movement is really about how do we just, bring that collaboration together and tear down those walls and talk about shared issues and how do we help the project teams to have the end in mind during their development, and how can the managed services teams give useful, non-blaming feedback to the project team so they can continue to improve their processes. And at the same time, how can we automate things that are going to make both the project teams and managed services teams more efficient, more effective, and more profitable in the long run?
That's great. Thank you for speaking to that DevOps definition, or that managed services definition more.
Mm-hmm.
Brent, in recent years, we talked a bit about origins and past of DevOps. And so bringing it closer to the present, where have you seen lasting impact created by DevOps mindset, DevOps practice?
Great question. I think there are a number of answers, but the one that I'm going to pick is, once again, because I even though I am a technologist, I also identify equally as a businessman. I enjoy both. Has to be the relationship between business and technology, right? So we see this from time to time when we get invited to help companies through Tarmac, and that is a relationship between, it's often described like this: business and tech, or hey, our developers aren't fast enough, or the QA team isn't fast enough, right? Those to me are not the problems. Those are symptoms of a larger issue. And I would say that, and I would drop this sort of DevOps like cultural aspiration right into the middle of that. Usually when you have a situation like that, it stems from a lack of transparency, a lack of visibility, potentially poor quality and speed, right? So if you are able to parachute in and start doing the block and tackle stuff, like, hey, we start writing some unit tests, we start doing some CI, now we're deploying every day to an environment that the business and the product owners can look at that and give me feedback on, and you start doing these little things. Once again, all of this automation and the constructs for how you pull that off are firmly in DevOps. But it's the relationship that you start to see improve that is an outcome of that is the actual problem manifesting as those symptoms. To me, that's where I see it being the most successful. And we've seen companies fundamentally turn around when you start doing these little simple things. We actually coined a term for it. At Tarmac, we've got a framework that we use called Tarmac 10. It's 10 simple things that we do on our projects every day. And it just so turns out that those 10 simple things done consistently equal quality, equal transparency, equal all of those things. And then the relationships start to improve and change. And that's personally gratifying to me. That's what I like to see, because I've yet to actually meet somebody on a team that was like not a good dev or not committed to the company, or these things that people sometimes leap to that conclusion because they don't have the relationship. And DevOps fixes that. It really, really does, especially if it's executed well and with some vision.
I will second your call out of the Tarmac 10, and we'll send that out in the follow-up email. It seems to me like a great articulation of DevOps meeting business and the results that can emerge from that crossover. So Keely, jumping back to one of the topics that we mentioned right at the start, this theme of project versus product. And it's sort of it shows up in people's job titles. People have big thoughts and feelings in this area. How do you relate this distinction, project versus product, to DevOps and managed services?
Yeah, so I guess the best way to describe it from a Fjorge standpoint is that the project is, it's really defined as a temporary solution with a beginning and an end, and a defined scope and resources, or a temporary endeavor that is undertaken to create a unique product or service, right? So the project team is creating the product, and then managed services is keeping that product alive and useful to the client on an ongoing basis. So the relationship between project versus product in a DevOps relationship is similar to the relationship between dev and ops. You know, how do we create that feedback loop and make sure that the project is set up for long-term product success?
Perfect. Thank you.
I mean, I can't agree more. I just want to like double down on that. So, you know, definitions being super important. For me, it's a matter of focus, right? If you're a project manager, your focus is the project. So things like, am I on time? Is the budget right? You know, has somebody logged 8 hours? Like those are the important things in a project. If you're a product manager, your focus is the product. And suddenly you're shifting out to like, how is the product doing? Are my users happy? Are people buying it? Like it's fundamentally different. And I think a really important distinction. So really, really well said, Keely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. I have questions that could take us the rest of the afternoon into tomorrow. So I'll do my best to kind of hit the most important ones. I see Dave has dropped a question in the chat here, which we'll get to in a little bit. If anyone else has questions that spark off of what we've talked about so far, feel free to drop it in the chat, and we'll use some of the remaining 15 or so minutes to talk through those questions. So before we get to Dave's question in the chat, I would love to hear a little bit from both of you, and we'll start with Brent on this one, about blockers regarding DevOps. That is a wide open question, so I'll let you take it any angle that you want to, but I'll give a little bit more context of blockers could be confusion, it could be distracting hype, which has led an executive to have a bad taste or bad opinion of DevOps, not seeing the ROI potentially. Or just resistance, kind of flat out resistance. So what blockers have you seen regarding DevOps?
You wanted me to go first?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All of those and more. But I will say this. Once people become accustomed, once they see this in practice, they never want to go back. Right. So it's just, for me, it's like managing any other kind of human change. It's not a technological issue, hardly ever. Is it technological? It's almost always people and process. The real common ones are exactly that. Like, in getting back to the very first question that you asked is, what is DevOps? There's some fear and trepidation for folks that aren't doing it right now. It's such a big topic. If you type in DevOps on Google, I mean, you could read from now until the end of, next year probably, and not have a firm grasp of what you want to do. And it's honestly one of the reasons why we've been so successful in this space is we come to the table saying like, look, we're here to deliver business value. I've articulated what that is. Go fast, have quality, succinctly. We can bring in a set of processes and tools and techniques that will help you achieve that out of the box. The reality is those things are going to change over time. The tech is always going to change, and it's going so fast in the DevOps space. Like every other month I'm reading about some other tool. Tools are going to change, but the aspiration remains the same, right? So if we can get the business sold on being able to do that, and usually they're our biggest partner in that because that's what they want. That coupled with like, and here's how you do it, and we help you do it, is kind of the 1-2 punch that we use to kind of break down those barriers. And then, we're a shop. You called me a big nerd at the beginning. It's absolutely true. We're all big nerds. We like to get it. We all like to get our hands dirty. Like at a certain point, I stop talking and we actually start doing things. And once people get a taste of it, they start connecting dots, and next thing you know, everybody's on board. So.
I like the way that you frame up the why versus how. If you have a strong why, you can kind of get through the how, especially if there's blockers, in between. Keely, I'll pass that one over to you and hear your perspective on blockers regarding DevOps and how to work around them or through them.
Yeah. So you mentioned some of these books that I've recommended to you, Tom. One of the first ones I read is Leading the Transformation, and it's really all about the importance of leadership and management buy-in on DevOps in order for there to be success. So I'd say one of the big blockers is like a question about how to implement it, right? So should you test it out with small teams and then let it sort of evolve from there? Should, the business leaders like come crashing down and say, this is how we're going to do things now, and bam, you have a change? And really, it's all about collaboration. So how can you get the business leaders to buy into this idea of DevOps and say, this is what our business goal is that we hope DevOps will help us to solve, and then empower those teams to come up with their own solutions and like bring those changes to life and give them flexibility to test out their ideas in small ways and mold them and change them based on the feedback that they get. So again, it's also about feedback loops. I'd say another blocker is misconceptions about the value, right? So what is the return on investment? Is everything tied to dollars, or is, employee satisfaction going to be part of the return on investment? Is general efficiency going to be a return on investment? Is client satisfaction and therefore ability for you to just increase your rates going to be, part of the return on investment? And just the culture change and the openness and the communication. So I think there's some blockers there where it's like, well, I don't know where the dollar values are going to come from, and so we don't want to try this out. And you really have to be very open-minded to what it is, what kind of return you're wanting out of this, and know that it is an agile process, meaning that like you can stop and start and pause and pivot based on, your changing business goals. And then I'd say the last blocker is this idea that DevOps is a single role. It's not a role. It's a culture change. It's a collaborative effort, and in this idea that there needs to be a DevOps role, there's this idea that there needs to be a DevOps expert to lead the charge, and that's really not what you need. You need an integrator, somebody who's going to be the cheerleader of the movement, and he's going to work with the people that are capable of making the changes and help them to learn and evolve and give them the resources that they need to continue moving forward. I mean, of course, it's important to have experts who can, make the right decisions with automation and QA and version control and the right tools and, all that sort of stuff. But that person doesn't need to be in a single role. Like, there can be those people that are already in your company who are just self-learning those things anyway that can really drive the movement forward in your company. And if you want to have a DevOps manager who's like, I'm going to hold everybody accountable to what they agreed to, that's great too. But just be flexible in how it is that you're going to understand the role and roles of DevOps.
Yeah, really great point. I love that. It's not a role, right? You can't take a team of people that used to be ops people or sysadmins and just stamp DevOps on. I mean, you can do whatever you want. It's your company. But it doesn't mean that you have DevOps culture just by changing titles around. So again, really well said, Keely. It is that cultural shift. It's about, people coming together, communicating, solving problems, and using modern tools to do that. And these things we talked about, like, automation and, deployment and all those kinds of things. So really
well, and the thing is that like technology is always changing, right? I mean, we are the ones that are changing it literally. So you're not going to find an expert in everything because things are being invented as we speak. There's new ideas coming up, and it might even be your team that invents the new DevOps tool, right? Or process, just because of your own experimentation and your value of that experimentation and feedback.
Yeah, that emphasis on agency and self-organization definitely seems to be an important theme throughout DevOps. One question from the chat here that you all addressed a bit with that last question about blockers is justifying the ROI, especially when you have maybe part of your organization that sees it, get it, want it, capacity to do it sort of perspective. And then maybe another part of the organization, skeptical, feels like they're writing an open-ended check, not really sure what the ROI is going to be. Just from a bulleted perspective, are there even like keywords that you recommend? I realize it's hard to summarize, but keywords you recommend to emphasize ROI related to DevOps?
Yeah, the open-ended check thing, we see that from time to time too. I think part of that is a bit of old school thinking. Like, I think that this is non-controversial, so if somebody jump in and challenge me if you think it is, I'd love to talk about it. If you have software that you deploy and you have customers that use that software, you are in the software business and you will need to support it until people don't use it anymore. And so DevOps is not like an investment that you make over and above your existing software. It's a method of working so that you can better support that software that's out there serving value for your users. ROI comes from that. There might be a little bit of, money that you spend to do that automation work that we're talking about, or if you're in an environment where you're not doing unit testing, for example, that's kind of like the bare minimum of things. You'll have to start investing in that. But those things have dividends. So it's not just like you're throwing money down the toilet. You're going to get that back out of your platform, assuming that it's got some runway to it. So what I say when I'm challenged with a question like that is like, look, you're going to be supporting this for the end of time. Don't you want to support it in the most efficient, cost-effective way possible? And if you put it in those frames and you start to show some of the value that you can achieve, like in AWS or Azure with scale and just-in-time computing and all those things, that it starts to kind of make sense and people do get it.
Perfect.
I'd like to add, for ROI, like create your own measurables, right? So if you've got that business leader buy-in in your company, as part of your DevOps, ongoing measurement of your return, what are the measurables that they want to see? Do you want to see, so at Fjorge, we talk about week scores. So, we each rate our week from a scale of 1 to 3. A measurable could be, because of DevOps, we're seeing an increase in our employee satisfaction by a score of an increase of 0.4, right? Like that is a measurable and that is a return. So if you're looking for dollar value, or looking for reduced cost, or if you're looking for less time to set up an environment compared to what your current situation is, those are measurables that are very easy to track. You just have to come up with them on your own for what's important to your company, both for the business leaders and for the developers and the support teams that are, playing a part in this whole DevOps.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it. I just have like one other thing that I want to add to, because as developers, and I've been one for a long time, sometimes we fall into this trap of, maybe opening the kimono a little too far on how we do our work. So this agency of the developer to start integrating these concepts into their code, I don't look at it as like you need business buy-in for that. Here's the classic example. I am horrible at doing like chores around the house and keeping things working. So if my toilet breaks, I call a plumber. When he gets here, I don't tell him what tools he gets to use to fix it for me. I trust that he knows what the heck he's doing. And I see that the same with developers. Now, I'm not saying you're going to like change the whole way that you manage your operational environment as a developer, but you can start doing the really basic things without permission. Like, for example, I'm writing a test on this because quality is important to me. And turns out I'm faster if I write it. So in a way, it's a little bit of a shift. And often when I give an analogy like that, business people kind of, after chuckling a little bit, kind of get it, right? Like this is core to the tool set of a developer and ops as you go down the line. I hope that makes sense.
Perfect. Yeah. So thank you both for clarifying on ROI. We got a question related to becoming a DevOps engineer. They're currently working as a programmer, an IT manager, actually specifically, and have a background in technology, but aren't really clear on their path, towards being a DevOps programmer, engineer. What are some starting steps that you would recommend down that path? We'll go ahead and start with whichever one of you feels, most clear on that.
Keely, would you like to? Or
I was actually going to say Brent.
Okay. Yeah,
Again, my experience with DevOps is really, I'm months in, right? I'm reading books, I'm watching videos, and everything I see is like, there is no DevOps title, but DevOps engineer is a thing. So maybe you could give some insight into what that typically means, or is that a thing? I don't know.
Yeah. So I think I understand this. So this person is already a programmer, which is great. That's a fundamental place to start. I think the barrier to entry these days to get into DevOps is supremely low. In fact, free in a lot of cases. AWS and Azure and GCP all offer sort of like a free period of time where you can go in and play with their tools as a way to learn. And so I would look at it like this. think about an application that you're writing. Maybe it's a web app or it could be a mobile app if you're into that world, and think through all the stages of it. I'm going to write it so that it's working locally. I'm going to write some unit tests for it. And then eventually I need to put it somewhere where people in the world can interact with it. So that speaks to an environment. The easiest way is going to be in one of the cloud providers. The three that I've referenced are by far the easiest. Then follow along the whole chain of command or the whole chain of events. So it's on your local environment. You're going to commit that to something like GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab. Choose one. Then you're going to run continuous integration on it. There's a bunch of free options out there: Jenkins, Circle CI, Bamboo, Azure DevOps, Code Commit and Code Pipeline instead of AWS. These are tools that take your code, run the tests, and then deploy. And then finally, set up the servers to deploy it. And if you're able to do that, that's the full life cycle of an application. If you can set that up, man, you're well down your path of getting there. The problem is if you just Google, like, how do I do DevOps? Like, it's going to be really difficult to assemble it. You always have to break it down to say, like, okay, how do I do GitHub? Then how do I do continuous integration with GitHub? Then how do I deploy from CI to AWS, EC2 or Docker, ECS, those kinds of things. If you pick it apart like that, eventually you'll build all of the building blocks that you need. And that's kind of the basic skill set. There's a lot more to it, but that's the entry point. On your journey, you're going to find all kinds of other things to read and places to branch off, but that's the basics.
Awesome. Thank you for that quick orientation. As we're coming down to the last couple minutes here, I want to make sure that people have follow-up information. If you're curious about Tarmac or Fjorge, we've got our URLs on the screen here, as well as LinkedIn and Twitter. And feel free to reach out to us directly on LinkedIn as well. If we go back to our information, then you can, there we go. So Keely Caverno, Tom Hart, and Brent Kastner. And in the last minute or so, as we're coming down to the wire, can you both, or let's see, Brent, can you quickly speak to what you would do differently if you were just starting out today? What has changed, and how would you adapt your practice if you're just getting going with DevOps?
Oh man, quickly, succinctly, man, you got the wrong presenter for that. Let's see, I don't live with a ton of regrets, and when I learn something new, I quickly change and adapt. So I don't have a bunch of that hanging over me, at least in my professional career. I would just say, like, there's a fear of losing the beginner's mind on things, right? Mm-hmm. Like, one of the things that I appreciate so much about Tarmac is that we're like 150 strong, and I literally learn something from this team every single day, and I'm not afraid of where it comes from. Like, I just want to learn this stuff, soak it in, and do better all the time. So I don't know if it's necessarily something to change, but I would say that folks that enter this kind of realm without a chip on their shoulder, without trying to be the smartest person in the room all the time, you're going to succeed. And if you have that kind of mentality, like, it's going to be really tough to keep up because things are moving really, really fast. Not the best answer in the world, but
that's great. Yeah. Thank you both for your time today. If there's any requests that you have of the audience in closing, or recommendations kind of in summary, I'll pause and give you both either a chance for that.
I'll share the books I've been reading. So the first one I read was Leading the Transformation. Sorry, I don't have the authors' names, but if you look up Leading the Transformation, and then the one I'm currently sifting through is Lean Enterprise. And then on LinkedIn Learning, if you just do a search for DevOps, there's a lot of really, really great entertaining videos about the topic. And I highly recommend those 3 resources. Maybe we can include those in the follow-up email as well.
Perfect.
Yeah, please do. I would like to see them too. So, and my memory is not as good as it used to be. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you both again. We'll share those resources in the follow-up email, and we'll look forward to continuing the DevOps conversation with you all.
Thank you. This was fun. I appreciate it very much.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.